for Tabletop for Two. Sorry, our dogs are super excited to be on the Twitch today, so we're kind of busy. I think that will make things extra exciting.
Yes, apologies in advance for ear-splittingly loud barking or just general crashing. I'm sure somebody's gonna loop around my legs and yank out some cords or something. Hey, Pink Sparkles, so glad you're here.
Yeah, it's going to be super exciting. So welcome to episode 7 of Tabletop for Two, a D&D duet show where we take a deep dive into how to play one-on-one 5e. Before we begin, we want to take a second to introduce ourselves. My name is Beth Ball. I'm a game designer and fantasy author, and one of the 2 writers behind D&D Duet. And joining me this evening is Jonathan Ball. I thought you might want to introduce yourself, but I'll do it for you. A game designer and educator, and as you probably guessed, the other half of D&D Duet. So our 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons work centers around adventures and advice for playing one-on-one D&D, so you can create a whole world just for 2. If you'd like to learn more about this special playing style or find adventures to help you along your way, you can find us at dndduet.com, and you can follow us on socials, on Twitter at dndduet and Instagram at D&D Duet also. This episode we're super excited about because we're talking about how to design your campaign and campaign arc, specifically around the player in one-on-one 5e. And as I'm sure you've heard us say in somewhere along in the past, if you're familiar with our work at all, part of what makes one-on-one D&D so special, as well as part of what we want to make sure we're designing and kind of taking into account, is that playing one-on-one D&D duet games are all about the player and their story, or actually the PC and the PC story. So as the GM storyteller, you're designing the campaign to align with the PC's goals, interest, class, proclivities, etc. So then the question that we're going to be discussing tonight is, what are the sorts of changes that we need to make when we're dealing with a Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen kind of situation instead of a Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins type of story? But before we get into that topic, we want to extend a special thank you to our amazing patrons and talk about tonight's sponsor.
Yes, so our patrons make all of our video content possible and are a big deal with just helping us make sure that we can continue to create the things we like to create. You can check them out on patreon.com/GroveGuardianPress. In addition, our stream tonight is brought to you by Beth's fantasy novella Aurora. Aurora is the prequel novella for the Age of Azuria high fantasy series, which explores a magical world that teeters on the brink between light and darkness. In this exciting action and magic-packed series filled with druids, pirates, werewolves, and more, ancient forces awaken and new heroes rise to the occasion. But this time, who will prevail? You can start your adventure in Azuria by picking up Aurora at bethballbooks.com, and you can pick it up for free still, right?
Mm-hmm. If you go to bethballbooks.com/join, you can be part of the Story Enclave and get a free copy of Aurora as my special thanks to you.
Yeah. Let's see. So, honey, when we talk about a single protagonist story, what are we really talking about here? What we got to do?
Okay, so it's like the whole big thing. I think that we're trying to merge the inner and outer journeys of our particular character while having fun at the table.
You're just gonna jump into the deep end.
I thought your question was asking me to jump into the deep end, so I leapt in.
Here we go. I'm holding my nose. I got my swim wings on.
You got your floaties.
Yeah.
Perfect. One of those little waist things with the
waist things are dangerous.
The unicorn one. Oh.
I mean, if you jump in with one of those, you can go right through, and then all of a sudden you're at the bottom. Or you get trapped.
So hopefully that didn't happen to our lovely viewers.
Spun around. You're upside down, feet kicking. It's no good.
You just have to flip yourself back over. So can you ask your question again? What does it mean to have a single protagonist story?
Well, why would we talk about a single protagonist story as it relates to one-on-one D&D?
Okay. I think part of that is normally when we think about D&D, we like the collective, you and me, we think about it in terms of a group game. And that's why I like to use Lord of the Rings as an example, as we have kind of the Fellowship. And yeah, they split up at some point down the line, but we would just be following
Spoiler
one
alert.
of those storylines. If you haven't seen it by now, or read it by now, it's not on me. You're funny. So we would be like Frodo and Sam and Smeagol running around instead of the whole big thing.
The whole big fellowship. Yeah. I think this is a huge difference, though. And for me, as a DM and as a storyteller, I think it's more exciting to write this kind of adventure or to like run this kind of game, because when I've run group games in the past, whether it's for D&D clubs or for just the sundry group games that you and I have played with other people, I enjoy that very much, of course, but it's also really hard to try to have an equity of player spotlight. And, even in a big group game, I'm still trying to make sure that the PCs are heavily integrated into the action of what's going on. But it's way harder to do that well when you have 6 different people sitting at the table. And I've found in group games that different players have different expectations about how much their character is going to be integrated into the campaign or how often they're going to be spotlighted. And it can be quite a juggling act.
Well, and I think that one-on-one D&D too provides at least more space for really in-depth characterization and exploration, because the one character is being spotlighted as opposed to needing to share the spotlight with a bunch of different people. And so I think we see with some, if we're like watching people's campaigns that maybe, or, if we were kind of a fly on the wall, I think that there are some arcs or sessions where one character will stand out more than another, but in a one-on-one game, that's going to always be the case for the PC. And that's really the design difference. It's not, okay, well, for now we're going to follow, I'm trying to think of like a character name. We're going to follow Bob's storyline for a bit, but once Bob gets the shoe, I was using a different Bob. Anyway, then we're going to follow Sally's storyline for a while, and Sally needs to get this necklace. Like, so you can have kind of different character focus beats potentially if you are having trouble getting all of the different characters in on like the one task. And ideally we have party cohesion, but that's definitely not going to be the same sort of concern in a duet game.
Yeah, it's a little bit, I don't know. I find that there can be more story and you can go into more detail with it, and it moves faster in a one-on-one game, which can kind of, for me, like keep the excitement and the interest, like personally as the DM, because we're not stuck for 3 hours trying to decide which are we going to take the left or right passage through this dungeon. Well, the players don't know, but both of them lead the same way, right? Like, and in a one-on-one game, you don't have to worry about that so much, which I like.
Yeah, you just go.
Yeah.
Or you ask your DMPC and sidekick and they say, I'm not sure. What do you think? And then it's back on you to say, okay, we're going on the left path.
Aha. So what are some strategies that we can use for keeping, like if we're designing a campaign with the PC in mind?
Oops. Gosh, sorry.
Whoa.
My keyboard was partially pulled out. I hurt myself. I actually want to back up just a little bit before we talk about specific strategies and say, so in this, or for this first scenario, at least what we're talking about at the beginning, let's say that you are designing a campaign from scratch or mostly from scratch for the player. So maybe they have a PC, maybe they don't yet, but we're going to assume homebrew world first off. And so then for starters, if you're just getting going, we want to be sure to say here at the beginning that you don't have to have the whole campaign planned out from the beginning. So much of it you will figure out as you go. And that's part of why in setting up this conversation, I think it's more helpful to think about planning things in arcs or kind of not beats, arcs. So like maybe it's based on location, maybe it's based on they're solving a particular problem, instead of thinking like, okay, here's where they're headed. They're level 1 now, but I need to know where they're going to be as a level 20 character. You can have an idea of what type of enemy they're going to be facing, but you don't need to have all of the other pieces figured out. It's been a while, but I used to see people online who got stuck creating their characters or got stuck creating their campaign because they wanted to have so much of this stuff figured out. You just need, let's just be really classic. You just need a tavern for them to start out in, and then they can go from there to one other place. You're 2 sessions in. You're going to have more things figured out then.
When you're just starting out a campaign, if you have a player character who's ready to show up and do their half of the work, then they've come up with somebody who has a problem or has a personality trait maybe that is problematic, or they have that's what the whole flaw thing is for, right? They have some kind of element of themselves that would lend itself to, they could just be the seed of the idea for where you're going to go from, what happens when the characters leave the tavern, right? I feel like designing with the PC in mind highlights what kind of interior work that they need to do, or what kind of questions they have or problems they have, and takes that as a seed of inspiration and then just kind of pulls on it until something amazing pops out.
So as one really specific example for Tales of Eldura, I planned the first arc. So that was 20 something sessions around Gareth's backstory and him missing his son. And so the first few adventures of that arc revolved around Gareth meeting allies, which also gave me a chance to get to know him and for him to have people to help him on his adventure. And then, in case you're interested, we actually earlier this week had kind of a secondary planning session, behind the scenes thing for Tales of Eldura, where we kind of did what we're talking about doing tonight, which was figuring out how to personalize the campaign more for Gareth and his interests.
Yeah.
So that's kind of if you want a longer application side of things, you can we can ping that video or something on YouTube, right? Later.
Totally. I think that was cool because we did the first half of that campaign, and it was, very much Gareth's story, but with the framework that we were taking from Descent into Avernus, a published campaign. And so we kind of followed that framework until Gareth had achieved that objective. And then, we needed to figure out, how do we go forward from here? Where is Gareth headed now, if we're not necessarily using that same framework? And I think it was so helpful. It was so helpful to me to sit there and kind of spitball with you what needed to happen with him.
Yeah. And you were just talking about the kind of the player doing their half of the work. It's fine for you to do that together. And so for you as the DM to help the player with what do some of these things look like, or to ask, it doesn't even have to be leading questions. You don't have to know where it's going, but it's helpful to have an idea of what's happening internally for the character to keep moving that forward. And I said this, I just threw this out kind of not randomly. It's because I know it's true. Okay, I'm going to make a declaration, and then we'll see if it actually stands. But
it's got to be a good declaration.
According to Lisa Cron and Wired for Story, and Very psychologist. Part of what we resonate with, what we respond to when we're watching, listening to, reading, whatever way we're interacting with the story, we're interested in kind of like in the back of our minds or in our, collective unconscious. Anyway, what we're interested in is what's happening internally with the character. Very likely we are not going to be in a high rise in LA that's getting run over or overrun by German terrorists. However, we can be in John McClane's situation where we are out of our element, overwhelmed, feeling alone, and feeling separated from the people that we care about. That's a super universal feeling in a very particular situation. And so what we have across Die Hard is different characters working through their own kind of little baby arcs of solving their internal problems, getting over their demons, so to say, and kind of getting past themselves, experiencing character growth. That's what we're doing in D&D. And so maybe it is the flaw that they're working through. Maybe they're just afraid that they're going to get blown to bits by a dragon. That makes sense. But that's what I meant when I said that we want to bring together the external and internal with not just the combats, but with the various challenges that our hero is being put through. And so I think that when we can dig down into that is when we're going to have really verdant one-on-one games, because then you as the player know what's going on with the PC, and the DM also knows what's going on with the PC. It's not a secret. And so during our session on Tuesday, if you rewatch that, you'll see me ask Jonathan, what is this difference between what Gareth thinks that he needs and what he actually needs? And that's like a really helpful, like if I get stuck when I'm writing, that's a really helpful question to kind of go to. And that's also like us kind of pulling back out of the story. And maybe there are going to be times in the campaign that you don't know. You might not know what the character needs. So that's what the quest or the struggle is at that point, is kind of figuring out what is going on internally with them and kind of picking that apart and then moving forward.
There's a lot there, babe.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry. I'm just trying to like figure out.
Actually, sorry.
I'm just trying to figure out how to respond. I know that was super helpful when you asked Gareth, like, what is the story that he's telling himself that's true that might not actually be true, and what does he need to figure out? And I think so often, right, like those two things are at odds, what they think they need and what they actually need.
So like in my novels, what Elliot thinks that she needs is freedom, but that's not what she actually needs. And so that differs per character. That's going to differ per campaign, or even for part of a campaign. I think the clearest example of that, or like the most dramatic example I've seen of that, was in the Pendragon series, which I read growing up. And so Bobby Pendragon gets like beat up. The protagonist gets beat up at one point. And so what he thinks he needs to destroy the BBEG is to get super buff. So he goes to this like intense training camp and he works for months, like learning to fight, getting stronger, all of these things. And then the challenge is actually about one's wits. And so he gets totally bested all over again because he has been pursuing this one path and was actually tricked and didn't have the kind of capacity to look at the story from that kind of bird's eye view that we have when we're outside of the story. And that was like, I don't know, it was really cool and dramatic and upsetting. Good job, DJ McHale. But we can do that in our games too. Yeah.
I mean, one of the best things about D&D too, to me, is that, like you mentioned, characters needed to exercise their demons. And in D&D, we can have characters exorcise their demons by depleting their hit points. I mean, like it could be like in a number of different ways, right? Like we can take this we can take something about themselves that they need to figure out and then have it symbolized in the game with something that has a stat block, and then just go to town.
And I think that's what's so, to me, that's what's so powerful about the storytelling in TTRPG, is that we can we're embodying, impersonating the heroes that we wish that we were, wish that we had, wish that we could be, and then getting to see what does it feel like to be this person who has so much agency in my environment that I get to change the way that the world works, looks, interacts, whatever that looks like. My caveat from earlier was going to be there's a video where Matt Colville is talking about the difference between his stream. It's a little bit older. He's talking about the difference between his stream versus Critical Role, where he's saying that the villains in his stream are external to the characters versus in Critical Role, at least as he sees it, a lot of the villains are the kind of manifestations of the character's internal demons. And that's what I think we see them, at least see most often in, I would guess that it's the latter version that we see most often in literature and film. I don't have a whole lot of examples of the former, but I'm sure we could find them. I'm sure someone knows. But so just speaking kind of generally, and maybe in your campaign, you want to have it be a little bit more pulled back. We're not saying that this is the only way to do a one-on-one campaign, but it is going to be more focused on the character, and that's going to involve their internal and external realities.
I was just trying to think about like what an outside of D&D example would be, because I get what Colville is talking about with having his characters be, I mean, people that are operating in a world that doesn't care about them, and they have to like figure out their own way into that. But outside of like TTRPGs or, you know, I mean, I hesitate to even say like real life where things are happening, you know, outside of us. Like we all main character ourselves, right? Like
we are the main characters in our own lives.
Yeah, and we relate to the world through the lens of, I'm trying to, like, I can think of maybe some video games where like that happens, where like this stuff is happening. You're just kind of like, I'm running around. But I don't know. I feel like it's kind of rare.
I don't buy it. Humans are natural storytellers. We create our reality. We're going to find a way to make whatever's happening about ourselves. We've also been watching Lucifer, and so Lucifer makes every single situation and conversation about himself, which I think is hilarious. Okay, but we've gotten kind of off of our single campaign PC. And I'm sorry, I derailed us into story theory. I hope that that's helpful.
So before we jump into the deep end, and before we are representing our characters' internal struggles symbolically with things that have stab blocks, what's a way that we can just get started?
So getting started, I think, whether you're starting in a tavern or not, if you're starting from the very beginning, you can think about what are some of those core human desires. So belonging, adventure, acceptance, love, desire, freedom. Any of those things will be kind of initial points to kind of poke and see if they're resonating with the PC. And so zooming out from that, we're going to assume at some level that the DM and the player are working together. While you're creating the campaign, they're creating their character. So we had a really collaborative experience with Gareth when you were first creating him for our Tales of Eldura game, our rewriting of Descent into Awareness, of me asking you things about Gareth's backstory and then adapting from those things. I kind of took the parts of the storyline that were working for me and then got rid of the rest, lumped together some NPCs from the ones available, those kinds of things to make it work for the story that we were trying to tell, the story that Gareth wanted to work out. And so you knew going into session 0, session 1, session 2, that your son Patrick that he had vanished and that Beacon had fallen. But Gareth didn't know that. And so it was still fun and exciting.
Definitely. Do you remember that process when we were first starting to play?
Mm-hmm.
Like with your very first character, Eliath?
I do. I had you made me a printout my character, and I'd come up with her name. I was really proud of myself. So you gave me a printout, and some of it had things filled out like family. So she had some family members, and then some parts we filled out together. So you were, I think, actively working on whatever spreadsheet it was. I can like vividly see the paper, and I was holding it in my hands, but I don't know where it is off the top of my head at the second where I'd be like, ta-da! This is one of those times I really want a prop and don't have one. But yeah, I remember talking through those things, and a lot of the character details and kind of her first, her initial struggles you had baked into who she was and her family. And so you thought that I would enjoy playing a half elf druid or ranger. True. Love it. And so you had made that decision for me, which if you DM watching this are playing with somebody who's new, I think it can be really helpful for you to at least narrow down some of those things for them, because there are so many decisions. I don't know that I would have started playing if you had just handed me the PHB and been like, here you go, make some decisions.
I know you wouldn't have.
Yeah, I don't think we'd be here if that had been the case.
Like, you're not a huge fan of rules. And if I'd handed you a giant book of rules, even if it was pretty, I think you would have
looked at the pictures.
Yeah, recoiled. And like there's lists and tables, and it looks like a lot until you get acquainted.
And then when you know what you're looking at, it's not overwhelming at all, and it's helpful. But yeah, if you can help you jump some of those hurdles for them, or even narrow them down. Like I can remember thinking, why in the world are there wizards, sorcerers, and like it was like and something else, and like, okay, well, outside of D&D, how am I supposed to understand what differentiates these types of beings? Because they all sound like magic casters to me. They play very differently. And so if you're like steeped in D&D spaces, then you know what's going on. But I also think it's really important for us to remember what it's like to not be steeped in a D&D space, where the difference between a wizard and a sorcerer is, semantics and spelling.
People not in the know.
Okay, so we can start with one of those kind of core desires, which when we were first designing my character, you baked in with her having being kind of divided from her family, right?
Yeah, I think that actually came about because you wanted to be a half elf because cool ears, and I'd already written this like human family. And so there had to be some drama with why you were a half elf. And we kind of had like, I don't think that we were breaking any kind of crazy ground with this, character who didn't feel at home and who had a difficult relationship with especially one parent, but also difficult with another parent, and, desired to be free from the castle, and then, got what she wanted, but not in the way that she thought. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody was, we've never seen that before, but like that existed, or we brought that to life in a way that had never existed before, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's a really good, you've made several really good points just now, but you don't have to be groundbreakingly original when you are starting off on your one-on-one campaign. So say your partner wants to play a rogue. Awesome. Maybe the first thing they need to do is go check in with their local thieves guild, or the player needs to know what is their relationship like with the local thieves guild. Maybe levels 1 through 2 are them taking on some missions for said
some
guild.
Thieves guild work.
Yeah.
Now I want to play a rogue in a thieves campaign.
It's fine. Hey, we can totally do that. But part of the reason why I think it's important to at least consider this non-groundbreaking is your player needs a chance to get to know their character too. It's one thing for them to understand their backstory and kind of be the character. It's another thing to be that character at the D&D table. And so give them that space, and playing in a familiar situation, environment, storyline, whatever that is, I think can be a really helpful way to figure out what is unique about your character.
Yeah, unless you're like a professional voice actor performing for bajillions of people every week, like you're probably not going to go in with a very solid understanding of who the character is. Like there have been so many times when I start voicing or playing a character and they're super different than what I think they're going to be. Like our the second DMPC that we introduced in our first one-on-one campaign, I had him pegged as this like hyper intelligent, almost like like BBC's Sherlockian, serious and analytical kind of character. And then the first thing he did was jump out and fake the appearance of a dead god so that he could convince a cult to let him escape something. It was just the most absurd introduction for a character, and we haven't looked back.
And he's a pretty absurd character, but I like that about him.
So I guess that's all to say, like, the characters that you're playing are going to surprise you. And I'd also say too, like we've been talking about kind of ideas for starting campaigns and like leaning on to an already tread path sometimes to like get you going and stuff too. Of course, this is all going to super depend on your table. Like if you have somebody that is gung-ho and they're like a grizzled D&D veteran that has this like really specific idea that they want to do for their campaign or whatever, like that's great. Generally, we are really excited to welcome newer players into the fold too, and so that's kind of where we start.
Well, and I mean, a lot of our audience, especially that we hear from, like haven't been playing D&D for ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And I think playing one-on-one is a really easy way to start playing D&D. And then why play any other way? No. I also wanted to point out too that one thing you will kind of pick up as you get to know the PC a little bit better is the types of NPCs that the character relates to, as well as the types of that the character relates to. Is that what I said? And then the types of NPCs, creatures, challenges that the player finds to be the most fun. And so for a little bit more on that, look at episodes 3 and 5 of Tabletop for Two. Why is that extra funny?
Oh, every time we talk about figuring out like what your player likes to do, I always think back to the disastrous session where I was running the excellent adventure from Winghorn Press, A Most Potent Brew. And I had adapted it for our campaign, and I attacked you with 8 rats. So that's when we learned about action economy. And we also learned that with one-on-one games, it's okay to take a break, and also don't attack your one character with 8 rats. So there was that learning. And then that's also where I learned that you didn't think that puzzles or riddles were worth doing whatsoever, especially after you've been attacked by 8 rats. Because instead of solving this riddle and like stepping on the, Indiana Jones style safe places, your character just death marched through this blade alley. And as a newbie DM in my infinite wisdom, I kept rolling damage and kept rolling to see like it said to do that on the paper, but what was happening at the table, you were clearly showing me wasn't fun. And I didn't know.
I thought I'd figured out the puzzle, and when it wasn't right, I decided it was arbitrary, and the fastest way to move forward would be to just keep going. It's like 3 or 4 things. There were only 3 options.
Is this close?
Sufficient to me. Okay. So I want to come back. Sorry, in our line. We have GMPCs next, but I want to make sure that we adequately talk about this kind of adapting for the PC question, because I feel like when I set this up for our session, it seemed very, very specific to me. But as we've been talking, I am worried that that's not quite so much the case. So let's look at a specific example and we'll just kind of work our way backward from there. So when we were going to play Waterdeep Dragon Heist, you let me and people were playing with know, hey, your character needs to have some things that they can do in downtime because this campaign has lots of downtime experiences. And so that helped shape how I built Persephone as a character. Mm-hmm. I also knew that she was going to be in a primarily urban environment, which let me play with lots of fun things for what would an urban druid look like? What could they do? That was really fun for me. And so that right there is, I think, the kind of example that we're talking about. It doesn't have to be this like deeply emotional question, like, what does it mean to belong somewhere? If that, like, you know, we don't have to puzzle that for forever and ever and ever. It can be something like
Who are we?
Who are we?
Where are we going?
It doesn't have to be like that. It can be, well, what would it be like to be an urban druid? I definitely would have seen more animals than bugs and birds and a rat, and kind of going from there. And so Persephone's character started as a way for me to kind of play around with those things. And I got to add lots of fun, what is it like to play a storyteller aspects after that. So it can be like lean on the things that your player is interested in. Players, let the DMs know what you're thinking. And that gets us back to another core thing for playing one-on-one D&D. It's really important for the player and DM to trust each other. You're not on opposite sides. You're on the same side. You're co-storytellers.
Absolutely. Do you want to talk about GMPCs? I don't know that I have anything else to throw in there.
Okay, I still feel like, okay.
What is the question? When we come up with
more specific things, we'll talk about them.
What more specific do we need?
I don't know. Maybe I'm worried that we could be more specific when talking about not just what does it mean to have a single protagonist story, but what does running that single protagonist story look like? So let me try to answer that question again really fast. Not really fast, but let me try to answer that question again. So for Gareth, I took an aspect of his backstory and created a campaign arc that I knew that he would latch onto emotionally and be willing to pursue, even though it meant risking his life. And that's the kind of question that we're asking our PCs to take on. Most likely, maybe it's more chill. Maybe they're running a store, and so it needs to be more like, what is their dream for the store? And they can kind of go from there. Maybe they want to be the greatest storyteller on the Sword Coast. Awesome. What does that look like? So it doesn't have to be like deadly stakes, the most extreme possible thing.
And then a dragon.
And then a dragon appears. Mm-hmm. It's your new best friend and it wants to run around with you. Right.
Psych. It's a tax collector in disguise.
Oh, is it taxing the business?
Yes. I think dragons would make really good tax collectors.
I think so too. I think they might overcharge. Okay, so one concern, now we can talk about the DMPC question. And then maybe you can talk about the storyline you changed for Persephone in a second. So, one thing we see often or hear often that we actually said at the beginning, the campaign is about the PC and it's often about the player. What does this character want? What are they trying to accomplish? We also recommend having someone for the player to run around with. I think that it can be a nice either recognition of the PC's friendship with the GM-PC, who we think is important to you so that the PC has someone to talk to. It can be recognition of their relationship, as well as giving the player a little bit of a break from needing to drive the narrative forward with their character when they don't know where it's headed, for you to lean on the GM-PC's story and their goals. And so you want to, it is a balancing act because you want a well-developed character with dreams, goals, things that they're trying to achieve who isn't going to overshadow the PC's objectives. And so I wanted us to talk for a little bit about what that looks like. So recently in Tales of Eldura, Evelyn felt comfortable enough with Gareth to come forward with what it is that she's trying to do in the negative planes, because she's been kind of beating around the bush about it for a while. And so Gareth has the choice, or had the choice, to say, okay, I will help you with this, or I'm not really interested in that. I knew from knowing you and knowing Gareth that likely Gareth would be on board, but that it was possible that he would say no. In our home game with Jack and Persephone, Jack has seen this like silver tree that has like chosen him and part of his destiny, but his connection to it. So this is the DMPC has like this connection to this thing, but it's also important in the destiny of my character, and her deity has been like, you need to go figure out what's going on with this tree. And so now they're on the same path that the DMPC led her to, but that she's still going to play a larger role in. And his character is set up in such a way that it doesn't bother him. He doesn't feel overshadowed.
Sidelined. Sidekick
syndrome. Hurt his feelings.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know, like there's kind of a, we talked about this the other day, right? Like there's kind of a meme in the D&D community about DMPCs being this, you know, if it's a player character that's run by the DM, you have a character running around with God on his side who can hog the spotlight or get away with things that maybe other characters wouldn't be able to get away with and things like that. But I think that like having a DMPC or a GMPC in a one-on-one game is as much about showing up as another person for the player character to kind of bounce things off against. But there's like you both kind of equally have skin in the game, and I feel like those problems that lead to those, you know, kind of jokey memes about DMPCs don't manifest in one-on-one games, in our experience at least. And I think part of that is the DM, since you're creating a world that's centered around the PC, necessarily your DMPC is going to be a product of that world that's centered around the PC, that's going to support as opposed to overshadow your player.
Yeah. I will say it happened one time.
Oh no.
I use a really specific example. So Quintitheus, the character that he was talking about earlier, one time was like too ridiculous and decided to do this thing that my character was like, I don't think that we should do that. And it started this whole, like, it would be like poking you referenced Indiana Jones a second ago. It's like poking the big boulder and then like sending it running, and then you have to solve the problem. And I was like, but that's like one time, and we've been playing together for years. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's something that DMs worry about. That's what I'm trying to say is I don't know that it's something that needs to be a point of concern. And if it becomes one, I think your player will let you know, or you'll be able to figure it out kind of as you go. But I think the cool thing that engaged plugged in DMPC can allow to have happen is it does increase the spontaneity. And so if you as the DM are setting problems before your character, the PC and the DMPC, or the PC and the sidekick, that you don't have the solution for, that gives you the space to come up with some ideas in the moment that your DMPC did that in our Steimrod, our Land of Vampires campaign. Was one time you came up with this really cool idea and you're like, oh, I didn't even think of this before. Can we do this? And Braceras was like, yeah. And then we did it. It was awesome.
Yeah. I had a thing.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, my next DMPC is definitely going to be somebody who just walks around causing terrible things to happen that your PC needs to react to. Like, oh no, I accidentally rubbed the magic lamp. Who could have known that? No, I'm kidding. But that was a super fun experience with this Time Rod game where, like, I mean, it's frequently I'm, as the DM, setting a problem up that I don't have an answer for. And then when I'm stepping into the role of a DMPC, I get to kind of think about it from their POV and bounce ideas off your character in a way that reflects how it would be if I was just a player at the table. I say just a player, but like that's really fun. And you have like the only way that works though is to go in definitely without a decided like this is the way that this needs to be solved, because otherwise I feel like it can be hokey. Unless there's some struggle.
Yeah, if you need to Deus Ex Machina, that's okay too. You don't need to kill the PC arbitrarily because you accidentally made something too difficult for them. Like that's not the lesson that we're like. That's not what we're advocating.
The password
for.
was Leviathan, and you said the Leviathan. A spike pit opens.
That's it. Of campaign.
The end.
Before we end our conversation, though, will you talk about the plot that you changed for Persephone recently with Fafina? Remember that when you were like giving me some clues, and I don't know if we weren't latching onto them at the level that you wanted. You know what I'm talking about?
Is this like the nature of Fafina as opposed to being this super bad? I'm not sure. What are you talking about?
This was an example of what not to do as the DM feeding an answer to the player. So my character is getting these hints and clues about this next arc that we're about to embark on. And she's learning about this city that she's going to maybe need to travel to. And she's met this NPC who's going to be traveling to there. But then she discovers that her family has been abducted or vanished or something and is also headed to this place. So we then become a whole lot more interested in traveling there as well. And so that really changed my PC's buy-in because her family is super important to her. But that was an example of what had been leading towards my PC helping an NPC be the main character in the NPC story, back to my PC being the main character. And this was kind of like a new layer for us of like of course the PC needs to be the main character, but it was like, what does that look like in situations that are much larger than themselves? And how do we keep the spotlight on the characters? So that was kind of a wandering spotlight exploration.
Yeah.
It was fine. It was really fun.
And that was like really cool because that was a hard transition because we were coming off of like, that was the first true extension out of a group game that I was running from the Waterdeep Dragon Heist module. And then we were just kind of on our own running around the Forgotten Realms. And I hadn't yet figured out how to get Persephone like central PC, like things designed around her then. And it was one of those things where like she's interacting with this world and like her interaction with the world, yes, reveals something about her, or, this is what kind of person she is, that she'll help somebody that's in trouble. But yeah, it didn't really involve her. And then when it super involved her, when her family got snatched, that became so much better. And it also too, like, that wasn't that long ago that like I kind of had to have that realization, which makes me wonder, like, I mean, we've been playing for years at that point. It makes me wonder what my next revelation is going to be.
I think you can know that right now.
Not ready yet.
Not ready yet. maybe we keep relearning the same things and we just get them at a deeper level.
That makes sense to me.
So chat, if you have any questions for us as we wrap up this evening, that would be lovely. I had to pull up our list of future episodes. Honey, is there anything else that you want to say about designing for single protagonist story? I want to say that it needs to be a collaborative effort between DM and player. And I really do hope that us doing that together earlier this week helps serve as a model. Because we got a little bit stuck. Like I got stuck as a DM trying to figure out, okay, all of this sounds great. Like I know here that it needs to revolve around the PC. And I got stuck in our Tales of Eldura campaign figuring out, okay, well, I don't know how to change this around the PC because I thought I had done that already and had made adjustments. I thought that had done it and those things still weren't working. And so some of that was like a conversation between the two of us of here's what I thought that you wanted in this campaign. Here's what I feel like I've been doing in this campaign. And then where's the gap between those two things? What do we need to get the PC kind of latched on and for this to be telling the PC story?
Mm-hmm. And it was really helpful for me too, like sitting down and figuring out like, oh, one of the reasons that I'm having trouble with this character right now is that he accomplished the goal that I made for him to accomplish. Like he solved the built-in problem already and hasn't grappled with or understood a continuing problem that would be such that it would keep you running around hell. It's kind of a huge commitment. And so sitting down and figuring that out was super helpful.
Okay.
But as far as designing with one player in mind, I think that making sure to keep communicating with the other person that's creating this world with you, sharing what you feel like is working and where you feel like there's room for something to be even better. Like at the end of the day, you're both sitting there telling stories together and trying to have a good time, like that's I think not losing sight of the importance of continuing to talk and reflect is good advice for anybody.
You can tweak what you're saying a little. I think it can be more helpful even for you as like players. Tell your DMs what you really liked in the session. DMs, tell the player what you thought was cool when you all played together. I think that like leading on the stuff that you both loved and enjoyed, as well as players, let the DM know what your character is thinking or thinking about. That can really help to kind of ease their planning process. If they've put a decision before you, let's say you play every week and you figure out on Tuesday, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm leaning this particular way, go ahead and let them know so that they don't have to plan the 3 different paths. They can just focus on the one. That doesn't hurt anything.
Yeah.
At all.
Definitely.
So for our next episode of Tabletop for Two, we are talking about villain design.
Oh my.
Super excited.
I love villains.
Yeah, me too. I'm just thinking about all the villains. Anyway, villain design. Let's see, Tales of Eldura returns on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can catch us on twitch.tv/D&D Duet, or you can catch the replays on YouTube. We also have had some cool interviews and opportunities in the last couple weeks. My interview on the Role Play Grow podcast with friend of the stream, Courtney of Lighthearted Adventures, went live today. And so you can check that out wherever podcasts are found. I also have a fiction focused podcast called World of Azuria, where you can tune in and hear the Age of Azuria series, along with some of the details and lore behind the world. And so episode 7 of that came out today. Episode 8 is coming out on Tuesday. And then are those all of our big things?
I think so. I just have to say thank you all so much for joining us for Tabletop for Two. We're here every Friday at 8 p.m. Hanging out on twitch.tv/DnD Duet. You can also find our Tales of Eldura on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. and replays on YouTube. If you enjoyed this show and would like to support our work, we'd love for you to buy our adventures at dndduet.com, as well as support our Patreon at patreon.com/Grove Guardian Press. Our patrons make our video content possible, and we're very grateful for them. They get to enjoy a one-on-one adventure and all kinds of good D&D stuff. And they're kind of helping us as we continue to make a very exciting one-on-one campaign and setting, and it's the biggest thing that we've ever put together.
D&D.
For D&D. I was going to say you've got novels out, but yeah, go ahead and check that out at patreon.com/Grove Guardian Press. Honey, anything else?
I don't think so. I think it's happy weekend, everybody. Thank you for hanging out with us, and we'll see you on Tuesday.
Thank you all. Happy gaming. Bye.